A young and newly ordained minister was not being well received by his congregation. He did not deliver very good sermons. And a deacon of the church attended the service one Sunday to hear him, and he listened to yet another disappointing sermon. And he asked the young man, "Why did you go into the ministry?" And the young man explained that he had been a farmer, and he had been out in the field, and he took a break one afternoon, and he looked to the skies, and he saw a cloud formation, and the clouds were shaped like a P and a C. And he knew immediately that it was a call from God to preach Christ. The deacon thought for a moment and said, maybe the message was to plant corn. Well, I know nothing about raising corn, and I'm certainly not going to talk about Christ, but we will find something to talk about today. So thank all of you for being so welcoming, and greetings from the Unitarian Universalists of Sarasota, or as some of our members now say, UUSRQ. SRQ is the code for the Sarasota-Bradenton Airport, and many businesses and organizations have added SRQ as a tagline to identify themselves geographically. Some of our members like it. Some of our members hate it, which makes us UUs. But one lady asked, what are we, the Unitarian International Airport? And greetings from our settled minister, Reverend Jay Wolin, and our community minister at large, Reverend Brock Leach, both who interned here and both who have very fond memories of this place. Someone once asked Yogi Berra, what time is it? And he supposedly responded, do you mean now? Yogi Berra, most of you probably know, was a Hall of Fame catcher for the New York Yankees, and he won 10 World Series, more than any other player in history. And his abilities on the field were often overshadowed by his unintentional witty sayings that have become called yogiisms. You can observe a lot by watching. The future ain't what it used to be, and nobody goes there anymore. It's too crowded. He also said, when you get to a fork in the road, take it. As nonsensical as this might sound, he was actually given directions to his home, and apparently, no matter which fork in the road you took, it did circle around to his home. So we UUs are coming to a fork in the road, and we too will take it. Today's topic is living up to the principles or values. I was not planning on this topic when I first accepted an invitation to speak here. I was planning on speaking on finding purpose in one's life, particularly as one ages. And maybe you'll invite me back to address that issue one day. But it became apparent in Sarasota that our members are rather unaware of the upcoming vote on the Article 2 bylaws. And I recently spoke in 2 other UU churches. On each occasion, there have been sermons and classes on the topic, and yet there has been substantial apathy. So I think we should start. And Jerry, may we have our first slide? So what is it the Unitarian Universalists do? Well, for about 39 years, UUs, with the principles as a glue that binds us together, have strived for justice across the board. So, with a disclaimer, I want to tell you it's not my intent to argue either for or against the proposed Article 2 amendments, which would replace the 7 principles in the UUA bylaws. The proposed amendments will be up for a vote at General Assembly in June. This is an important issue, and it deserves everyone's attention. We all live by codes or rules. Even the most rebellious of us live by the rules of the road. We follow tax standards, societal expectations, and we are, hopefully, a country governed by the rule of law. I grew up according to the code of my parents, a solid Midwestern ethic based on the Golden Rule. Then I went into the Marine Corps, went to boot camp at Parris Island, and they had a code of whatever you say, sir. But my journey to Unitarian Universalism and the seven principles began when I fell in love with Mary Fran Raynault. You read or heard my bio that we connected at a high school reunion. When I retired from the University of Missouri, and she was in New Jersey. I called her and asked if I could visit her for a weekend, and she said yes, and I journeyed to New Jersey, and I never left. And she was the president of her congregation in Paramus, New Jersey at the time, so I tagged along. And the people were nice, and they were very friendly, but they seemed pretty liberal for a Midwestern conservative. And early in our relationship, I told Mary Fran that she was too smart to be a Democrat. She told me I was too dumb to be a Democrat. So it wasn't the liberalism that brought me to Unitarianism. My journey was really more about faith, or the lack of it. I was raised Methodist, did the summer camps, was president of the youth group, and then I married a Catholic and I attended Mass for years. But somewhere along the way, I realized I didn't believe in the miracles. I just didn't. It's not that I set out to disprove the miracles, I just didn't believe in them. And so I went to a Discover UU session in Sarasota, and we had an interim minister, Reverend Margaret O'Neill, and I told her, I don't believe and I'm going to hell. And she said, Bill, you don't have to go to hell if you don't believe in hell. So as silly as it sounds, that literally lifted a weight off of my shoulders. It was a physical feeling. So we talked about the fourth principle, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. And we talked about letting religion evolve as our world and our civilization evolves. And I signed the membership book that day. I got my first desktop computer in 1993. And up until that time, I was a bullet point guy. I was in marketing, and I made sure that wherever I went, they had an overhead projector. And I would put my slides in outline form with lots of bullets, and I had a spiel for each one of those bullets. So when I became a UU, I thought it was really cool that we had a bullet list of principles. And I don't know them by heart, but I certainly have the gist of them in my head and in my heart, and they are my moral compass. And we recently affirmed or added the eighth principle in Sarasota last October. I do know that first principle. When people ask me about Unitarian Universalism, I always recite the first principle. We affirm the inherent worth and dignity of every person. A renowned 20th century rabbi, Abraham Heschel, wrote, "Just to be is a blessing, just to live is holy," and he went on to say that Unitarian Universalists affirm the inherent worth and dignity of every person as a given of faith, an unshakable conviction calling us to self-respect and respect for others. Rabbi Heschel, if you'll excuse the pun, affirmed the greatness of our first principle. And I am fond of the principles, and I am glad we have them. But wait a minute. Let me interrupt this program for a special announcement. At General Assembly in 2020, a study commission was formed to study Article 2 of our bylaws for possible amendments or revisioning. And after a lot of hard work, the proposed amendments will be voted on at GA next month. When I first looked at the length of the new article, I was surprised and overwhelmed, but I got through it. The principles are still there. The proposed amendment calls just in a lot more language for us to be more actively engaged than previously. And it's true that the most active verb in the principles is the word affirm. But on the other hand, we Unitarians have had a pretty good track record of social justice under the umbrella of the 7 principles. Some believe the amended Article 2, which adds more verbs, will cause us to do even more. So the new amendment gives us 6 values, and some proposed amendments would add 2 more values. If passed, our principles become values and covenants. So each value would have a tagline defining that value followed by a covenant to action. The principles are still there, but they're just camouflaged. You can remember these values by remembering the acronym JETPIG, Jerry. This is the UU JETPIG. So J is for justice, E is for equity, T transformation, P is pluralism, I interdependence, and G is generosity. Now we don't have time today, or we might, but we're not going to, discuss all of these values. And it was never my intent to lead a study group or a class on the values. But my point is, your delegates will be voting on Article 2 in June. Article 2 deserves, I've said this before and probably will say it again, it deserves our attention. So let's look at 2 examples. Jerry, if we look at the first principle, the inherent worth and dignity of every person, and if you look at the value equity, the tagline is, we declare that every person has the right to flourish with inherent dignity and worthiness. So that certainly sounds familiar. And the covenant is, we covenant to use our time, wisdom, attention, and money to build and sustain fully accessible and inclusive communities. And that also sort of relates to the 8th principle. The 4th principle, Jerry, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. Now here, the comparison isn't in the tagline, it's in the covenant. But the tagline is, we celebrate that we are all sacred beings, diverse in culture, experience, and theology. The covenant is to learn from one another in our free and responsible search for truth and meaning. And again, sounds familiar. We embrace our differences and commonalities with love, curiosity, and respect. And so it goes. We do not have time to compare all the principles and values this morning. Suffice it to say that the values are different than what we have known, and they deserve our attention now. An important vote is coming up. How do you feel about it? Please show the graph, or the next slide. So before you finalize your feelings, at the heart of the values and covenants is the word love. And I thought, okay, but so what? We are Unitarians. We stand on the side of love. We strive to build a beloved community. Currently, we affirm the inherent worth and dignity of every person, and there are many people out there that we do not know. People of color, people of different faiths, people of different sexual orientations, people who are just lost. And we know that they are all someone we are supposed to love, and we act accordingly. If this sounds like I favor the new Article 2, please don't jump to that conclusion. Inspired by the principles, every time we sought justice, we sought equality or inclusion, that is an act of love, even if the principles don't state it as such. So before I knew of the principles, I had another set of rules that I lived by. There is a Robert Fulghum book. Everything I need to know I learned in kindergarten. Problem is, I never went to kindergarten. I was born and raised in Sistersville, West Virginia until I was 10. Sistersville was too small for kindergarten, but I did have an educational opportunity that kids today don't have. I had a cowboy and Western movie education. There was one movie theater in Sistersville, the Paramount Theater, which wasn't open every night, but it was always open on Friday night, and it had a cowboy feature. For 50 cents, my folks could get rid of me for a couple hours. It was a quarter admission, a dime for popcorn, and the change went for a comic book at the drugstore next to the theater, probably a Western. The stars rode across the silver screen. Roy Rogers, Gene Autry, Johnny Mac Brown, Lash LaRue, the Durango Kid, Red Ryder, Cisco Kid, and many others. And the importance of the Golden Rule, or at least half of the Ten Commandments, was reinforced in every one of those movies. Some cowboys were loners, but many had sidekicks. Gabby Hayes, Smiley Burnett, Pat Brady, Andy Devine, Pat Buttram, Little Beaver, Tonto, and Poncho. And their loyalties were never in question. And then there were the well-known horses. Trigger, Champion, Silver, Topper, Tony, Scout, Diablo, and Dale Evans' Buttermilk. And there was even a Jeep called Nellie Bell. And these were Westerns or Oders or Cowboys and Indians movies, and they weren't PC. Native Americans were often called Indians, Redskins, or Savages. But think of this. I heard classical music for the first time. The William Tell Overture and similar music was the background for all the horse and wagon chases. Things I learned: don't trust the federal government. White men speak with forked tongue. The government repeatedly broke promises to Native Americans. The Indian agents were often corrupt, either selling goods meant for the natives or selling rifles and firewater to the natives. The good guys treated their horses well, generally wore white hats, always fought fair, never kicked the bad guys when they were down. The bad guys always kicked the good guys when they were down. Heroes were always clean-shaven. Sidekicks sometimes had full beards. And bad guys always had a 2-day growth. And if the bad guy was smooth-shaven, he was a dirty dealing poker player who had an ace and gun up his sleeve. Money wasn't important to the good guys. I never understood that. But it was always important to the bad guys. They were either stealing it, robbing banks, trains, stagecoaches, or rustling cattle, or stealing water rights. Guns never ran out of bullets. Nobody ever bled when they got shot. Today we never run out of guns, and people do bleed. The good guys would not shoot you in the back, and the bad guys would shoot you any way they could. In a horse chase, you always jumped the guy towards the downhill side. If you were riding shotgun and got shot, you grabbed your stomach, stood up, and pitched forward into a team of horses in a somersault. Arguments were settled by fistfights. There was nothing worse than being a dirty, low-down horse thief. And the good guy always got the girl if he wanted her in lieu of the horse. And finally, I hope you remember this, the wheel spokes would be going backward as the wheels rolled forward. So in all seriousness, these movies did promote morals and ethics embedded in the heroic characters. These standards helped shape my character, and I enjoyed the learning process. But like most of these movies, the issues were always pretty black and white. Things are not as black and white in today's world. The lines have become muddled and everything is gray. And so I will look to either our principles or the values as my rules to live by. Yeah, this is me at age 16. I was tall and skinny. I went wherever the wind in my ears took me. And my dad wanted me to play basketball, so he put a hoop up on the garage. I wasn't very good. I couldn't dribble, and I couldn't pass, and I couldn't shoot the ball. And then someone suggested putting air in the ball. Well, that just made a big difference. So, actually, I did play a lot of sports, and sports are regulated by rules so that fair is fair. And I believe life should be the same way. Fair is fair. I believe life has not been fair for all segments of our society. And every time we make life a little bit more fair, that's an act of love. A man was watching a dog chase its tail. He asked the owner, why is he always chasing his tail? He never catches it. And the owner replied, it's not about catching the tail, it's about the chase. So I continue to chase and aspire to the principles or the values. It's not my intent to campaign either for or against the proposed Article 2 amendments. I've said it before, they deserve our attention. Take a look at Article 2. Make your own decisions. It's good to get in touch with our faith. And I also know, as much as I affirm the principles, I do not always live up to them. I find them difficult at times. But I will continue to chase them. And tonight I will dream of a simpler time, and I will choose to win the heart of the girl and not the horse. Thank you, and let it be so.